The rain hammered against the barn roof like 1,000 desperate fingers trying to get in, and Jake Morrison stood there dripping wet, his chest heaving, his green eyes wild with something between panic and determination. "I can't do this anymore, Cole," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't pretend I don't feel this way about you." Cole Brennan's hand froze on the halter he'd been hanging on the wall. His massive frame went rigid, every muscle tense beneath his flannel shirt. The words hung in the humid air between them like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to take back. Outside, thunder rolled across the Montana sky, but inside the barn, the silence was deafening. That moment, that single, heart-stopping confession, would change everything between them. But to understand how they got there, you need to know how it all began. 3 months earlier, the summer had arrived on the Brennan Ranch with the kind of heat that made the air shimmer over the pastures. Cole had been running the family's cattle operation for 2 years since his father passed, and at 24, he'd built a reputation as one of the hardest-working ranchers in the valley. Standing 6'4" with shoulders that looked like they could carry the weight of the world, Cole was the kind of man people noticed. Quiet, capable, with dark eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. He'd hired Jake Morrison without really meaning to. The kid had shown up at the ranch in early May, 22 years old with a backpack, and a story about needing work for the summer. He was lean where Cole was broad, with sandy hair that fell into eyes the color of Montana summer grass. There was something about the way Jake carried himself, a mix of determination and vulnerability, that made Cole agree to give him a trial period. "I'm a hard worker," Jake had said that first day, standing in the dusty yard with the morning sun catching the highlights in his hair. "I might not know everything about ranching, but I learn fast, and I don't quit." Cole had looked him over with a practiced eye, noting the calluses on Jake's hands despite his city boy appearance, the straightness of his spine, the direct way he met Cole's gaze without flinching. "All right," Cole had said. 2 weeks. We'll see how it goes." Those 2 weeks had turned into a month, then two. Jake proved himself capable and willing, rising before dawn to help with the feeding, spending long hours mending fences under the brutal sun, never complaining even when blisters formed and burst and formed again. But it was more than just his work ethic that kept Cole from letting him go. There was something easy about having Jake around. In the evenings, after the work was done and they'd wash up at the outdoor pump, they'd sit on the porch of the main house with cold beers and watch the sun paint the mountains gold and purple. Jake would talk about his life before, growing up in Seattle, dropping out of college, disappointing his parents by refusing to follow the path they'd laid out for him. Cole would listen more than he talked, but sometimes he'd share stories about growing up on the ranch, about his father's impossible standards and the loneliness of running the place alone. "Don't you ever get tired of it?" Jake asked one night, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. "The same routine every day, the isolation." Cole took a long pull from his beer, considering. "It's not the same every day," he said finally. "Cattle get sick, fences break, weather changes everything, and it's not lonely when you've got good help." He'd glanced at Jake when he said it, and something in that look made Jake's heart skip in a way he didn't quite understand yet. The 4th of July weekend, they drove into town for the annual celebration. Cole rarely went to these things, but Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch had been pestering him for weeks, and Jake had seemed excited about experiencing real small-town America. They wandered through the street fair, Jake's eyes wide at the simplicity of it all, the pie-eating contests, the makeshift rodeo, the local band playing country covers in the town square. "This is incredible," Jake laughed, watching a group of kids chase each other with sparklers as twilight descended. "I never had anything like this growing up." Cole found himself watching Jake more than the festivities, noticing the way his face lit up with genuine joy, the way he moved through the crowd with an openness that Cole had never possessed. When someone jostled Jake from behind, Cole's hand shot out instinctively to steady him, fingers wrapping around Jake's upper arm. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Cole's system. Jake's skin was warm, the muscle beneath firm, and for just a second their eyes met and something passed between them that made Cole's breath catch. He dropped his hand quickly, shoving it in his pocket, his jaw tightening. "You want some food?" he'd asked gruffly, needing to break whatever that moment was. Later that night, lying in his bed in the ranch house while Jake slept in the converted bunkhouse across the yard, Cole stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what was happening to him. He'd always known he was different, had always pushed those feelings down deep where they couldn't cause problems. On the ranch, with his reputation and his father's legacy to uphold, there was no room for complications. He dated occasionally, women from town who his neighbors approved of, but nothing ever stuck, and he'd told himself that was just fine. But Jake had awakened something in him that he'd kept carefully buried. The way Cole's eyes followed him across the pasture. The way his heart rate picked up when Jake smiled at him over morning coffee. The way he found himself making excuses to work alongside Jake instead of sending him off to handle tasks alone. It terrified him. July melted into August and the heat became oppressive. They worked in a rhythm now, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with few words. Cole taught Jake how to rope calves for branding, standing behind him to adjust his form, his large hands guiding Jake's smaller ones on the lariat. The proximity was both torture and necessity, and Cole told himself it meant nothing, was just part of training. But Jake was struggling with his own realizations. He'd always known he was attracted to men, had dated a few guys back in Seattle before everything fell apart, but he'd never felt anything like what he felt when he was around Cole. It wasn't just physical attraction, though God knows Cole's presence made Jake's pulse race. It was the way Cole's rare smiles felt like a gift, the way his quiet competence made Jake feel safe, the way those dark eyes seemed to see through all of Jake's defenses to something true underneath. One afternoon in mid-August, they were working on the north fence line when Jake's hammer slipped and smashed his thumb. He yelped, dropping the tool and clutching his hand. Cole was at his side in an instant, his large hands gentle as he examined the injury. "Let me see," Cole murmured, his voice low and concerned. He cradled Jake's hand in both of his, carefully inspecting the already swelling thumb. His touch was so tender, so careful that Jake felt tears prick his eyes, not from the pain, but from the overwhelming sensation of being cared for. "It's okay," Jake managed, his voice shakier than he wanted it to be. "Just hurts." Cole looked up then and they were close, so close that Jake could see the flecks of amber in Cole's dark eyes, could smell the sun and sweat in something essentially cold. Neither of them moved. Jake's heart was pounding so hard he was sure Cole could hear it. Cole's thumb was absently stroking the back of Jake's injured hand, a small, unconscious gesture of comfort that felt more intimate than anything Jake had ever experienced. "Cole," Jake whispered, and it wasn't clear if it was a question or a prayer. Cole's eyes dropped to Jake's lips for just a fraction of a second before he seemed to catch himself. He released Jake's hand like it had burned him, stepping back and clearing his throat roughly. "We should, get some ice on that, back at the house." The ride back in the truck was silent and tense. Jake held his throbbing thumb but barely felt it, his mind replaying that moment over and over. Had he imagined the way Cole looked at him, the way Cole's breathing had changed when they were close, the absolute stillness between them that felt charged with possibility? That night Jake lay in his bunk and made a decision. He couldn't keep this inside anymore. Whatever this was between them, even if it was one-sided, even if it ruined everything, he needed to know. He'd spent too much of his life hiding, pretending, conforming to what others wanted him to be. He'd come to Montana to find himself, and part of that meant being honest about his feelings, even if that honesty came with consequences. But fear kept him quiet. Fear of losing this job he'd come to love. Fear of losing Cole's friendship and respect. Fear of being alone again. So he waited, watching for signs, trying to read Cole's carefully controlled expressions, hopping for some indication that what he felt wasn't entirely one-sided. Cole, meanwhile, was waging his own internal war. He'd catch himself staring at Jake over dinner, would lie awake thinking about the weight of Jake's hand in his, would imagine what it might feel like to close the distance between them and damn the consequences. But then he'd think about his neighbors, about the ranch's reputation, about the whispered rumors that would spread through the valley like wildfire. He'd think about his father's voice, harsh and unforgiving, and he'd lock everything down tight again. The tension between them grew like a living thing. Their easy conversations became stilted. The comfortable silences turned awkward. They were hyper-aware of each other in a way that made every accidental touch feel electric and every avoided glance feel like a rejection. Mrs. Henderson noticed when she stopped by with a casserole one evening. "You two fighting?" she asked Cole while Jake was in the barn. "There's a funny energy around here." "Just tired," Cole said, not meeting her eyes. "Long summer." She studied him with the knowing look of someone who'd lived 7 decades and seen everything. Well, you take care of that boy. He's got good bones, that one. Don't let pride or fear make you lose something valuable." Cole wanted to ask what she meant, but she was already heading to her truck, leaving him standing on the porch wondering if everyone could see what he was trying so hard to hide. The breaking point came on the last Friday of August. Cole had to drive into the city, 3 hours each way, to pick up a part for the tractor and handle some business at the bank. He'd be gone overnight, staying at a cheap motel and heading back Saturday morning. It was the first time since Jake had arrived that they'd be apart for more than a few hours, and something about that fact sat uneasily in both their chests. "You need anything while I'm in civilization?" Cole asked that morning, checking his list for the 3rd time, clearly stalling. Jake shook his head, trying to smile. "I'll hold down the fort, try not to get corrupted by city life." Cole almost smiled at that. "I'll do my best." He hesitated, his hand on the truck door. "Jake, he stopped, seeming to struggle with something. "Just be careful while I'm gone." "Always am," Jake said softly, and there was something in his green eyes that made Cole's chest tighten. The drive gave Cole too much time to think. Away from the ranch, from the daily routine that kept his mind occupied, he couldn't escape the truth anymore. He was in love with Jake Morrison. Completely, terrifyingly in love with a kid who'd shown up on his doorstep 3 months ago and turned his entire world upside down. The question was, what the hell was he going to do about it? He checked into the motel that evening and sat on the scratchy bedspread, staring at his phone. Jake had texted him a photo of the sunset over the pasture with the caption, "Not the same without you here." Cole's thumb hovered over the keyboard, wanting to say something honest, something real, but all he managed was, "Good shot, sleep well." Back at the ranch, Jake was packing the bunkhouse like a caged animal. The silence without Cole was deafening. He'd grown so used to the rancher's presence, his steady footsteps, his low voice, the sense of safety that came from having Cole near, that the emptiness felt almost physical. He thought about calling one of his friends back in Seattle, but what would he say? "I'm in love with my boss, a closeted rancher in Montana who probably doesn't feel the same way." Around midnight, unable to sleep, Jake walked out to the barn. The horses nickered softly as he entered, and he found comfort in their warm presence. He sat in the hay, leaning against a post, and let himself imagine a different life. One where he could tell Cole how he felt. One where Cole might actually feel the same way. One where 2 men could build a life together on a Montana ranch without fear or hiding. It seemed impossible, but Jake had learned that impossible things sometimes happened if you were brave enough to reach for them. Saturday afternoon, Cole's truck rumbled up the long driveway. Jake was working on the water pump near the barn, and he stood as Cole parked, wiping his hands on his jeans. Their eyes met across the yard, and something in Cole's expression was different, more open, more vulnerable than Jake had ever seen it. "How was the trip?" Jake asked as Cole approached. "Long," Cole said. "How were things here?" Quiet. Jake couldn't look away from Cole's face, searching for something he couldn't quite name. They stood there in the afternoon heat, the space between them charged with everything they hadn't said. Cole's hands flexed at his sides like he wanted to reach out but didn't know how. Jake's heart was hammering against his ribs. "Jake, we need to," Cole started, but his phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered with visible frustration, and Jake could hear Mrs. Henderson's voice on the other end, rapid and worried. One of her horses had gotten tangled in wire and needed help. "I'll be right there," Cole said, ending the call. He looked at Jake with something like regret. "I have to." "Go," Jake said. "I know I'll finish up here." Cole nodded, but he didn't move immediately. He seemed to be trying to memorize Jake's face, and the intensity of his gaze made Jake feel like every nerve ending was on fire. "When I get back," Cole said quietly, "we're going to talk, really talk, okay?" "Okay," Jake whispered. And then Cole was jogging to his truck, leaving Jake standing in the dust with hope and terror warring in his chest. But Cole didn't come back that night. Mrs. Henderson's emergency was more complicated than expected, requiring a vet and hours of careful work. He texted Jake around 8, "Going to be late. Don't wait up." Jake tried not to feel disappointed. He made dinner, ate alone, cleaned up, and still Cole wasn't back. By 10 o'clock, restless energy had him packing again. By 11, he was sitting on the porch steps, watching the driveway and trying not to think about all the ways tomorrow's conversation could go wrong. That's when the storm rolled in. It came fast, the way summer storms do in Montana. 1 minute clear skies, the next minute the temperature dropping and wind whipping across the pasture. Jake hustled to get the animals secured, moving through the familiar routine Cole had taught him. He was just closing up the barn when the rain started, fat drops that quickly became a deluge. He was soaked by the time he got back to the bunkhouse, but something made him pause. Through the rain, he could see headlights on the driveway, Cole's truck, but instead of heading to the main house, it stopped by the barn. Jake watched as Cole got out and went inside, probably checking on the horses one last time despite the late hour and the storm. And Jake made a decision. If they were going to talk tomorrow anyway, if Cole was already planning to have some kind of conversation, then why wait? Why spend another sleepless night wondering? The thought of being brave terrified him, but the thought of spending one more day living in this limbo was worse. He ran through the rain toward the barn, the water plastering his shirt to his skin, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. He yanked open the barn door and stepped inside, and there was Cole, turning at the sound, his dark hair dripping, his eyes widening in surprise. And the words came tumbling out before Jake could stop them. "I can't do this anymore, Cole. I can't pretend I don't feel this way about you." The silence that followed was absolute. Jake stood there dripping and shaking, from cold or adrenaline he wasn't sure, and watched as every emotion he'd ever wondered about flickered across Cole's usually stoic face. Shock, fear, confusion, and then, like the sun breaking through clouds, something that looked an awful lot like hope. "Jake," Cole said, and his voice was rough, almost broken. "What are you?" "I'm in love with you," Jake said, and saying it out loud was terrifying and liberating all at once. "I've been in love with you for weeks now, maybe longer, and I know it's probably not what you want to hear, and I know I'm just some kid you hired for the summer who's going to leave in a few weeks, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this every single time I look at you." Cole took a step forward, then stopped, his hands clenching and unclenching. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do." Jake's voice was stronger now. "I know exactly what I'm saying. I see the way you look at me sometimes, Cole. I feel the tension between us. And maybe I'm completely wrong, maybe I've imagined all of it, but I needed you to know. I needed to be honest for once in my life." The rain hammered on the roof. Thunder rolled in the distance. Cole stood there, this massive, powerful man who looked absolutely wrecked, and Jake could see him struggling with something huge. "You're not wrong," Cole said finally, so quietly that Jake almost didn't hear him over the storm. "You're not wrong about any of it." Jake's breath caught. "What?" Cole ran a hand through his wet hair, a gesture of frustration and surrender. "I've been lying to myself for months, hell, for years, telling myself I didn't feel things I felt, didn't want things I wanted, and then you showed up and made it impossible to keep lying." He looked at Jake with raw honesty in his dark eyes. "You terrify me, Jake Morrison. What I feel for you terrifies me." "Why?" Jake asked, taking a tentative step closer. "Because I've spent my whole life being who everyone expected me to be. My father's son, the respectable rancher, the guy who keeps his head down and doesn't cause problems." Cole's voice was thick with emotion. "Because in a town like this, with a reputation to uphold, being who I really am could cost me everything I've built." "Or," Jake said softly, closing the distance between them until they were just a few feet apart, "it could give you something worth more than any of that." Cole let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe it is. Maybe we make it complicated because we're scared." "I am scared," Cole admitted, and the vulnerability in those 3 words made Jake's heart ache. "I'm scared of losing the ranch, losing people's respect, losing myself. But Jake," his voice broke, "I'm more scared of losing you." Jake felt tears mixing with the rain on his face. "You're not going to lose me. You're leaving in 2 weeks, back to your real life." "What if I don't want to?" The words surprised Jake even as he said them, but he realized they were true. "What if this is the most real my life has ever felt?" They were so close now that Jake could feel the heat radiating from Cole's body despite the cool rain that had soaked them both. He could see the war playing out in Cole's expression, desire fighting with fear, hope battling with doubt. Jake wanted to close the final distance between them, but he knew this had to be Cole's choice. He'd said his piece. Now he had to wait and see if Cole was brave enough to take the leap with him. "Tell me what you want," Jake said. "Not what you think you should want, not what's safe or expected. Tell me what you really want." Cole's eyes dropped to Jake's lips, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want you. I've wanted you since the day you walked onto my property with that backpack and that determined look in your eyes. I want to wake up and see you every morning. I want to build something with you that's ours. I want, God, Jake, I want so many things I've never let myself want before." "Then take them," Jake breathed. "Take me, I'm right here." For another heartbeat, Cole didn't move. And then, like a dam breaking, he closed the distance between them and pulled Jake into his arms. The kiss was inevitable, necessary, perfect, Cole's mouth finding Jake's with a hunger born of months of denial and desperate wanting. Jake made a small sound of surprise and relief, his hands coming up to grip Cole's shoulders, and Cole kissed him deeper, one large hand cradling the back of Jake's head while the other wrapped around his waist. It was everything, it was right, it was coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against Jake's. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I've never. With another man, I've never." "We'll figure it out together," Jake said, his hand sliding up to cup Cole's face. "We don't have to have all the answers tonight." Cole pulled him close again, just holding him, and Jake could feel the rapid beating of Cole's heart against his own chest. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other while the storm raged outside, both of them trembling with emotion and relief and the terrifying beauty of finally being honest. "Stay," Cole murmured against Jake's hair. "Not just for 2 more weeks. Stay." "Okay," Jake said simply, and felt Cole's arms tighten around him. They eventually made their way through the rain to the main house, hands clasped tightly together like they were afraid to let go. Inside, Cole found towels and they dried off in comfortable silence, stealing glances at each other and smiling like teenagers with a secret. The fear and uncertainty hadn't disappeared completely, but it felt manageable now, like something they could face together. "This is going to be complicated," Cole said as they sat on the couch with fresh coffee, Jake tucked against his side in a way that felt natural and right. I know. The town, the neighbors, they're going to talk. Some of them won't be kind about it. I know that too. Jake tilted his head to look up at Cole. But I spent my whole life trying to fit into boxes other people made for me. I'm done with that. If people have a problem with who we are, that's their problem, not ours. Cole pressed a kiss to Jake's forehead, marveling at how easy such gestures already felt. You're braver than me. No, I'm not. I'm just done being afraid. Jake laced their fingers together. And you took the biggest leap tonight. You chose to be honest even though it scared you. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. They talked into the early morning hours, sharing stories they'd never told anyone, making plans for a future they were choosing together, stealing kisses that still felt miraculous in their newness. Jake learned that Cole loved old westerns and hated mushrooms, and had always dreamed of expanding the ranch to include a horse rescue. Cole learned that Jake had a degree in environmental science he'd never used, that he'd always wanted to write but was too scared to try, that his favorite sound was morning birdsong in the Montana dawn. I was running away when I came here, Jake admitted as the first light of day started to creep through the windows. From my family's expectations, from a relationship that ended badly, from myself, I guess. I thought I'd work the summer and then figure out what to do next. I never expected to find this. You. I was just going through the motions, Cole said. Running the ranch because it was what I was supposed to do, dating women I didn't love because it was what was expected, being half alive because it was safer than being whole. He turned to fully face Jake, his dark eyes serious. You made me want to be whole again. As the sun rose over the pasture, painting everything gold, they finally allowed themselves to rest, stretched out on Cole's bed together for the first time. It was innocent, Jake tucked against Cole's chest, Cole's arm wrapped protectively around him, but it felt momentous. They fell asleep to the sound of each other's breathing, both feeling more at peace than they had in months. Part 2, The Revelation. The next few weeks existed in a bubble of cautious joy. They kept their relationship private, not out of shame, but out of a need to protect something precious while it was still new and fragile. At work, they maintained professional boundaries, or tried to, though Cole's eyes lingered on Jake a little too long, and Jake found excuses to brush past Cole a little too often. At night, though, Jake moved his things into the main house, into Cole's room, into Cole's life. They learned each other slowly, carefully. Cole was tentative at first, having denied himself for so long that allowing himself to want felt dangerous. But Jake was patient, understanding that some walls took time to come down. They'd lie in bed and talk for hours, Cole's fingers tracing idle patterns on Jake's skin, both of them still amazed that they got to have this. What are you thinking? Jake asked one night, noticing the slight furrow in Cole's brow. Cole was quiet for a moment, his hand coming to rest over Jake's heart. I'm thinking that I've never felt this happy, and I'm thinking that I'm waiting for something to ruin it. Hey, Jake caught Cole's hand, bringing it to his lips. Nothing's going to ruin this. We won't let it. But the bubble couldn't last forever. Reality had a way of intruding, and it came in the form of Cole's brother, Marcus, who showed up unannounced one Saturday afternoon in early September. Jake was in the barn when he heard the unfamiliar truck pull up. He walked out to see a man who looked like a younger, harder version of Cole. Same build, same dark hair, but with a cruel set to his mouth and cold eyes that raked over Jake with immediate dismissal. You the hired help? Marcus asked. Jake Morrison, Jake said, extending a hand that Marcus ignored. Where's Cole? In the north pasture, should be back soon. Marcus grunted and leaned against his truck, pulling out a cigarette. Jake stood there awkwardly for a moment before retreating to continue his work, but he could feel Marcus's eyes on him the whole time, assessing, judging. When Cole returned an hour later and saw his brother's truck, Jake watched all the openness drain from his face. He went rigid, his expression closing off in a way Jake hadn't seen in weeks. It hurt to witness the transformation, to see Cole pull the walls back up. "Marcus," Cole said flatly as he dismounted, "what brings you out here?" "Can a man visit his brother?" Marcus flicked his cigarette butt into the dirt. "Been too long, Cole. Thought I'd check in, see how the old place is doing." Jake knew he should make himself scarce, but something kept him there, watching. He saw the tension in Cole's shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. "Place is fine," Cole said, "same as always." Marcus's eyes slid to Jake, then back to Cole. "Who's the pretty boy?" Jake saw Cole's jaw tighten. "Hired him for the summer. He's a good worker." "Bet he is." There was something ugly in Marcus's tone, an insinuation that made Jake's skin crawl. "Seems pretty comfortable here, like he belongs." "He does his job well," Cole said, his voice carefully neutral. "Jake, why don't you head into town? Pick up that feed order I called in." It was a dismissal, clear and painful. Jake wanted to argue, to stay, to not let Cole face whatever this was alone. But he saw the plea in Cole's eyes. "Not now, not like this," and he nodded. "Sure, boss," he said, the word feeling wrong in his mouth after weeks of breathless Coles in the dark. "I'll be back in a few hours." As he drove away, Jake watched in the rearview mirror as the brothers faced each other, and his stomach churned with worry. Marcus stayed for 3 days, and they were the longest 3 days of Jake's life. Cole became a stranger, distant, formal, barely meeting Jake's eyes. At night, Jake slept alone in the bunkhouse again, the main house off-limits while Marcus was there. He tried to be understanding, tried to remember that coming out was a process and everyone moved at their own pace, but it hurt. God, it hurt to be shoved back into the closet after having tasted freedom. On the 3rd evening, Jake was cleaning tack in the barn when he heard raised voices from the house. He moved closer despite himself, his heart pounding. "Always were soft," Marcus was saying. "Dad knew it, worried about it constantly." "Dad's dead," Cole said, his voice tight with anger. "His opinions don't matter anymore." "Don't they? You're running his ranch, living in his house, trying to fill his boots. But you're not him, Cole. You never will be." "I know that." "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying real hard to pretend you're someone you're not." A pause, weighted and dangerous. "Or maybe I should say, pretending you're not someone you are." Jake held his breath. "I don't know what you're implying," Cole said, but his voice had gone flat dead. "That kid, Jake, the way you look at him when you think I'm not watching. I'm not stupid, Cole. I know what I'm seeing." The silence stretched so long that Jake thought he might have missed Cole's response. Then, barely audible, "Get out." "Am I wrong?" Marcus pressed. "Because if I am, just say so. Tell me I'm seeing things. Tell me you're not." "Get the hell off my property." "So it's true," Marcus laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Jesus Christ, Cole, Dad must be rolling in his grave. His son, the rancher everyone respects, the pillar of the community." "I said get out," Cole's roar made Jake flinch. "This is my land, my life, my business. You don't get a say in any of it." "I'm your brother. I have every right to care about this family's reputation." "You care about yourself, you always have. Now take your judgments and your narrow-minded bullshit and leave. And Marcus," Cole's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous, "don't come back." Jake heard footsteps, a door slamming, and then Marcus's truck roaring to life. He stayed hidden in the shadows of the barn until the taillights disappeared down the driveway, and then he waited, giving Cole space, time to process whatever had just happened. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, unable to stand it anymore, Jake walked to the main house. He found Cole sitting on the porch steps in the dark, his head in his hands. Jake sat down beside him, not touching, just present. "He knows," Cole said without looking up. "He knew the second he saw us together." "Are you okay?" Cole let out a shaky breath. "I don't know, I told my brother to leave and never come back. The last family I have left, because he couldn't accept who I am." "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly. "Don't be." Cole finally raised his head, and even in the darkness, Jake could see the tears on his face. I'm not, or I won't be once this stops feeling like my chest is caving in. He reached for Jake's hand, gripping it tight. I'm sorry I pushed you away these last few days. I'm sorry I made you sleep in the bunkhouse, made you feel like something to hide. You were protecting yourself, I understand. No, you were right. Cole turned to face him fully. I was being a coward, and I can't keep doing that. I can't keep pretending, not anymore, not after having what we have. Jake squeezed his hand. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done hiding. I'm saying you moving into this house permanently. I'm saying if people in town have a problem with us, they can take their business elsewhere. I'm saying, his voice broke. I'm saying I love you, Jake, and I'm not going to keep acting like that's something to be ashamed of. Jake felt tears burn in his own eyes. You love me. So much it scares me. Cole cupped Jake's face in both hands. I know it's fast, I know we've only been together a few weeks, but Jake, I have never felt like this about anyone. Ever. And if Marcus can't accept it, if half the town can't accept it, then they don't deserve to be part of my life. Jake kissed him then, deep and fierce and full of everything he felt. I love you too, he whispered against Cole's mouth. I'm so in love with you. They held each other on those porch steps for a long time, both of them shaking with emotion and relief. When they finally went inside, Jake didn't ask if it was okay to stay. He just followed Cole to their bedroom, and they fell into bed together, holding each other like anchors in a storm. The next morning, over coffee, they talked about what came next. Cole made calls to the neighboring ranchers, letting them know that Jake was now his partner in the business and in life. Some of the responses were supportive. Some were coolly polite. A few were openly hostile, and Jake watched Cole's face tighten with each difficult conversation, but he never wavered. Mrs. Henderson drove over that afternoon, and Jake braced himself for judgment. Instead, she hugged Cole so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. About damn time, she said. I've been watching you two dance around each other for months. Thought I was going to have to knock your thick skulls together. You knew? Cole asked, stunned. Honey, I've known about you since you were 16 and couldn't take your eyes off the Randall boy during that summer rodeo. I was just waiting for you to figure it out and find someone worthy of you. She beamed at Jake. This one's a keeper. Treat him right. Yes, ma'am, Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. Not everyone was as accepting. They lost some business, got some cold shoulders at the feed store, heard whispers that stopped when they walked into the diner. But they also found unexpected allies, the young couple who ran the hardware store, the veterinarian who'd always seemed a little too understanding, even the gruff old rancher 2 valleys over who pulled Cole aside at the farmer's market and said, My grandson's gay. Lives in Portland because he didn't think he could make it work here. You two give people like him hope. Don't you dare let the bastards grind you down. September turned into October, and the ranch found its new rhythm. Jake officially became Cole's partner in every sense, learning the business side of things and bringing fresh ideas that Cole was surprisingly open to. They talked about Jake's environmental science degree and how they might implement more sustainable practices. They made plans to start the horse rescue Cole had always dreamed of. They built a life together, one day at a time. But Jake's old life wasn't done with him yet. It started with a phone call in mid-October. Jake was in the barn when his phone rang, an unknown Seattle number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Jake, it's David. Jake's stomach dropped. David Chen, his ex-boyfriend, the relationship that had ended in spectacular disaster back in Seattle. How did you get this number? Your mom. Look, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to talk to you. Can we meet? I'm in Montana. That's kind of a long way for coffee. I'm actually in Billings for work. I could drive out to wherever you are. Jake, please, it's important. Against his better judgment, Jake agreed to meet David in town the next day. He told Cole about it that night, and he could see the worry flash across Cole's face before he carefully smoothed it away. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to," Cole said. "I know, but I think I need closure. That whole part of my life ended without any real resolution. Maybe this will help me close that chapter for good." Cole pulled him close. "Want me to come with you?" "No, this is something I need to do alone, but thank you for offering." The next afternoon, Jake sat in a booth at the diner and waited, his stomach churning with nervous energy. When David walked in, still handsome, still polished in a way that screamed big city, Jake felt nothing. No flutter of attraction, no lingering pain. Just a vague curiosity about what had seemed so important back then. "You look good," David said, sliding into the opposite seat. "Different, healthy." "Montana agrees with me." Jake studied his ex. "What's this about David?" David had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology. The way things ended between us, the things I said, I was cruel. I was angry and hurt and I lashed out, but that doesn't excuse it. You didn't deserve that." "No, I didn't," Jake agreed quietly. "I've been in therapy, working through some things. My therapist suggested I make amends with people I've hurt, and you were at the top of the list." David paused. "I heard you left school, that you've been out here working on a ranch. Are you happy?" Jake thought about Cole, about waking up in strong arms every morning, about the satisfaction of hard physical work and building something real. "Yeah," he said, "I really am." "Good, that's good." David smiled, and it seemed genuine. "You deserve to be happy, Jake. I'm sorry I couldn't give that to you. We weren't right for each other. I see that now. I was trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to fit into your world, and it was never going to work." They talked for another hour, properly closing the chapter on their relationship with honesty and mutual respect. When David left, Jake felt lighter, like he'd been carrying a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged and could finally set it down. He was heading back to his truck when he saw Cole leaning against it, arms crossed, looking uncertain in a way that made Jake's heart ache. "What are you doing here?" Jake asked, smiling. "I thought you were checking on the cattle." "I was, but I couldn't stop thinking about you meeting your ex, and I guess I just wanted to be nearby, in case you needed me." Cole looked almost embarrassed. "I wasn't spying, I just—" Jake kissed him, right there in the middle of Main Street in broad daylight, not caring who saw. "I love you," he said. "Just you. David's my past, and it's a past I'm happy to leave behind." Cole kissed him back, one hand tangling in Jake's hair, and Jake heard a truck horn honk in support as someone drove by. When they broke apart, both grinning, Cole's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Take me home," Jake said, and they drove back to the ranch together, hands clasped over the center console, both of them feeling like they'd cleared another hurdle. Part 3: The Choice. November arrived with an early snow that blanketed the ranch in pristine white. Jake stood at the bedroom window one morning, watching the sun rise over the transformed landscape, and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to his eyes. This was home. This was where he belonged. Behind him, he felt Cole's arms wrap around his waist, pulling him back against a warm, solid chest. "What are you thinking about?" Cole murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "How lucky I am," Jake said simply. "How I came here looking for a summer job and found everything I never knew I needed." Cole pressed a kiss to Jake's temple. "I'm the lucky one. You gave me permission to be myself, to want what I want without shame." They'd settled into domesticity with surprising ease. Their days were filled with the work of the ranch, harder now with winter coming, preparing the cattle and horses for the harsh months ahead. Their nights were spent in comfortable routine, making dinner together, arguing about what to watch on TV, reading by the fire with legs tangled on the couch. The simple, beautiful mundanity of building a life with someone you love. Jake had started writing again, inspired by the landscape and his journey. He'd wake early some mornings and sit at the kitchen table with his laptop, trying to capture the feeling of Montana sunrises, the weight of Cole's hand in his, the way healing felt like coming home. He didn't know if he'd ever share what he wrote, but the act of creating felt important, like reclaiming a part of himself he'd lost. Cole watched Jake bloom with quiet pride. He'd never seen someone take to ranch life the way Jake had. Most people who came from the city either hated it immediately or romanticized it without understanding the brutal reality of the work. But Jake embraced all of it: the backbreaking labor and the early mornings, the isolation and the community, the challenges and the rewards. More than that, he brought new energy to the ranch, questioning old methods and suggesting innovations that Cole's pride might have resisted from anyone else. "What if we rotated the grazing patterns more frequently?" Jake asked one evening, showing Cole an article he'd found about regenerative agriculture. "We could improve the soil health and increase the land's carrying capacity." Cole read the article, his brow furrowed in concentration. "My dad did it the same way for 40 years. "I know, but that doesn't mean there isn't a better way." Cole looked at Jake, saw the earnest hope in his green eyes, and felt something in his chest expand. "Okay," he said. "Let's try it. Show me what you're thinking." They stayed up late that night making plans, Jake's laptop open between them, sketching out new approaches to old problems. It felt like partnership in the truest sense, two people building something bigger than either of them could alone. The first real test of their relationship came in December. The town's annual Christmas festival was the social event of the season, and for the first time in years, Cole actually wanted to go. Not because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to walk through the festival with Jake, wanted to introduce him properly as his partner, wanted to stop compartmentalizing his life into public and private selves. "Are you sure?" Jake asked when Cole suggested it. "We don't have to make a statement." "It's not about making a statement. It's about living my life openly with the person I love." "But Jake," Cole's expression grew serious, "some people are going to be ugly about it. I don't want you to be blindsided." "I can handle it," Jake said, and he meant it. He'd grown a thicker skin over the last few months, had learned to separate his worth from other people's opinions. "Can you?" Cole thought about it honestly. 6 months ago, the answer would have been no, but now, with Jake beside him, he felt strong enough to face anything. "Yeah," he said, "I think I can." The festival was everything Jake had imagined a small-town Christmas celebration would be: twinkling lights strung between storefronts, vendors selling hot cocoa and roasted chestnuts, carolers in Victorian dress, children throwing snowballs in the square. They walked through it together, not hiding but not flaunting either, just being. Some people pretended not to see them. Some stared with undisguised curiosity or disapproval, but more people than Cole expected greeted them warmly. Mrs. Henderson waved from her booth selling homemade jams. The young couple from the hardware store invited them to join their group by the bonfire. The veterinarian introduced them to her wife, a woman who taught at the elementary school, and the four of them talked about the challenges and joys of being openly queer in a small town. "It gets easier," the teacher, Maria, told them. "The first year is the hardest. People need time to adjust to seeing you as a couple, but eventually, for most people, it just becomes normal." "And the ones who can't adjust?" Jake asked. "You stop caring what they think," she said simply. "You build your family with the people who do accept you, and you let go of the ones who can't." It was good advice, and Jake held onto it when they ran into trouble later that evening. They were getting fresh cups of cocoa when a man Cole's age, someone he'd gone to school with, stepped into their path, clearly drunk and looking for a confrontation. "Well, well," the man slurred. "If it isn't Cole Brennan and his little boyfriend. Tell me, Cole, does your daddy know what a disappointment you turned out to be?" Cole's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Move, Derek." "What are you going to do, hit me, in front of all these people? That really cement your reputation, wouldn't it?" Derek's eyes were mean, vindictive. "Everyone knows what you two are doing out at that ranch. It's disgusting. You should be ashamed." Jake felt Cole tense beside him, ready to escalate, and he put a gentle hand on Cole's arm. "He's not worth it," Jake said quietly. But Derek wasn't done. "Your father built that ranch into something respectable, and you're destroying his legacy, bringing your perverted lifestyle into this good town. That's enough." The voice was sharp, authoritative, and it came from behind them. Jake turned to see a woman in her 60s, someone he didn't recognize, stepping forward. "Derek, you're drunk and you're making a fool of yourself. Go home before you say something you'll really regret." "Mrs. Brennan, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." "You don't speak for everyone, and you certainly don't speak for Cole's father." The woman, Mrs. Brennan, apparently someone who knew Cole's dad, looked at Cole with kind eyes. "Your father and I served on the church council together for years. He was a complex man, not always easy, but he loved you more than anything. And all he ever wanted was for you to be happy and run the ranch well. From what I hear, you're doing both." She turned to Jake. "You must be Jake. I'm Helen Brennan, no relation despite the name. I've heard good things about the work you're doing with Cole. The ranch needs fresh thinking." "Thank you," Jake managed, stunned by this unexpected defense. Helen looked back at Derek with cool dismissal. "Now, Derek, you have a choice. You can apologize to these young men for your rudeness, or you can leave. But you will not stand here spreading hate at a Christmas festival." Derek mumbled something that might have been an apology and stumbled away. Helen watched him go, then smiled at Cole and Jake. "Don't let people like that dim your light. This town is changing, slowly but surely. You two are part of that change, whether you mean to be or not." After she left, Cole stood very still, processing what had just happened. "I thought everyone who knew my dad would judge me," he said quietly. "Not everyone," Jake said, squeezing his hand. "People surprise you sometimes." They stayed at the festival for another hour, and the confrontation with Derek faded into background noise. What mattered was the way Cole held Jake's hand openly, the way they laughed together watching the children's choir, the way they felt like a real couple in a real community. Driving home that night, the truck's heater working overtime against the December cold, Jake turned to Cole. "That was a good night." "Yeah," Cole agreed, a small smile playing at his lips. "Yeah, it was. I think we're going to be okay." Cole reached over and laced their fingers together. "I know we are." Christmas came and Jake called his parents for the first time in months. The conversation was stilted at first. They'd been hurt when he left Seattle, confused by his choices. But when he told them about Cole, about the ranch, about finally feeling like he'd found his place in the world, something in his mother's voice softened. "You sound happy," she said, "really happy." "I am, Mom, happier than I've ever been." "Then I'm happy for you, we both are." A pause. "Could we maybe meet him, this Cole of yours?" Jake's eyes met Cole's across the room, and Cole nodded, mouthing of course. "Yeah," Jake said, his throat tight. "I'd like that. Maybe you could come visit in the spring." "We'd love to." After the call, Jake sat for a long moment, processing the unexpected acceptance. Cole pulled him into a hug, and Jake let himself be held, grateful for every choice that had led him to this moment. They spent Christmas Day working the ranch. Animals didn't care about holidays. But in the evening, they made a special dinner together, exchanging simple gifts. Cole gave Jake a leather journal embossed with his initials for his writing. Jake gave Cole a framed photo of the two of them on horseback during a sunset ride, both of them laughing, obviously in love. "When did you take this?" Cole asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't. Mrs. Henderson did, actually. She emailed it to me last week and said she thought we should have it." Cole stared at the photo for a long time, and Jake watched as a single tear tracked down his cheek. "I never thought I could have this," Cole said finally. "This kind of happiness, this kind of love. I'd convinced myself it wasn't in the cards for someone like me." "Well, you were wrong," Jake said softly, wiping the tear away with his thumb. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." They made love that night with a tenderness that spoke of devotion, of promises made and kept. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Cole whispered, "Marry me." Jake went very still. "What?" Cole propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at Jake with complete seriousness. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been together a few months, but Jake, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to build a life with you officially, legally. I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours. I want—" his voice broke. "I want you to be my husband." Jake felt tears streaming down his face. "Are you serious?" "Completely, utterly. If you need time to think about it, I understand, but—" "Yes," Jake interrupted. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Cole kissed him then, deep and passionate and full of joy, and Jake kissed back with everything he had. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing and holding each other so tight it almost hurt. "I don't have a ring," Cole said. "I should have planned this better." "I don't need a ring, I just need you." They stayed awake until dawn, making plans and dreaming about their future. They'd have a small wedding, they decided, maybe in the spring when the wildflowers bloomed in the meadow. They'd invite the people who mattered, the ones who'd supported them. They'd build the horse rescue together. Maybe, eventually, they'd think about adopting kids, giving a home to children who needed one the way they'd needed to find each other. "We're really doing this," Jake said as the sun started to rise, "building a whole life together." "We really are," Cole confirmed, pulling Jake closer, "and I can't wait." Part 4, The Future. The engagement wasn't a secret, but they didn't announce it widely either. They told the people who mattered. Mrs. Henderson cried and insisted on making the wedding cake. The veterinarian and her wife offered to help with planning. Even Helen Brennan sent a note of congratulations with a generous check and a note that said, "For your future together." But not everyone was supportive. Marcus found out through the grapevine and called Cole in a rage, saying things that made Cole's hands shake with anger. Cole hung up on him and blocked his number, choosing his future with Jake over a past that brought nothing but pain. Some of the neighboring ranchers stopped doing business with them entirely. The feed store owner made snide comments every time they came in. The local bar they'd occasionally visit for a beer made it clear they weren't welcome anymore. Each rejection stung, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. "I'm sorry," Jake said one night after a particularly harsh encounter in town. "I'm sorry that loving me costs you so much." Cole caught his face in both hands, forcing Jake to meet his eyes. "Loving you doesn't cost me anything. Those people, their small-mindedness, their hate, that's not a cost, it's just noise. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I would give up everything else 100 times over if it meant keeping you." January brought brutal cold and heavy snow, the kind of winter that tested even experienced ranchers. They worked from dawn to well past dusk, making sure the cattle had food and water, breaking ice, checking for any animals in distress. It was exhausting, relentless work, but they did it together, and there was something beautiful in that shared struggle. One particularly cold night, they came in from the final check, both of them frozen and exhausted. They stripped off their wet clothes and stood in the shower together, just warming up, holding each other under the spray of hot water. No words needed, just the comfort of presence and touch. "I used to hate winter," Cole said after a while. "It was so lonely facing it alone." "But you'll never have to face it alone again," Jake promised. They got out, dried off, and fell into bed in a tangle of limbs, too tired for anything but sleep. But Cole caught Jake's hand before sleep claimed them both. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For being brave enough to tell me how you felt that night in the barn. For not giving up on me even when I was too scared to accept what I wanted. For choosing this life, this ranch me." Jake rolled to face him, their noses almost touching in the darkness. "I didn't choose you despite this life, Cole. I chose you because of it. Because you're the bravest, strongest, most beautiful person I've ever known. Because loving you feels like coming home." They fell asleep like that, faces inches apart, breathing in sync, both of them finally fully at peace. February brought the first signs of spring, longer days, warmer afternoons, the promise of renewal. Jake submitted his first article about sustainable ranching practices to an agricultural magazine, never expecting them to accept it. When they did, offering to pay him for more pieces, he was stunned. "You're a writer now," Cole said, beaming with pride. "I knew you could do it." "It's just one article. It's the start of something bigger. I can feel it." Cole was right. The article caught the attention of other publications, and suddenly Jake had multiple offers for freelance work. He could write from the ranch, could share their story, not the personal details, but the journey of making ranching more sustainable, of building community in rural America, of creating change from within traditional systems. "I might actually be able to contribute financially," Jake said one evening, looking at the contracts he'd been offered, "instead of just being the ranch hand you fell in love with." Cole looked up from the ranch accounts he'd been reviewing. "You've always contributed. The ranch is doing better now than it has in years, and a lot of that is because of your ideas and your work. But if writing makes you happy, if it's something you want to pursue, then I'm all for it." They started planning the wedding in earnest. They chose late April for the date, when the snow would be gone and the wildflowers would blanket the meadow. They kept it simple, a ceremony in the meadow with their closest friends, a reception in the barn that Jake and Cole would decorate themselves. Nothing fancy, nothing traditional, just a celebration of their love and commitment. Jake's parents flew out in March to meet Cole and see the ranch. Jake was nervous. Despite his mother's words of support, he knew his father had reservations. But watching his dad shake hands with Cole, seeing the way Cole's respectful competence won his father over, seeing his mother fall in love with the ranch and the life Jake had built there, he felt something settle in his chest. "He's a good man," Jake's father said on their last evening, pulling Jake aside. "I can see how much he loves you, and I can see how happy you are. That's all a parent wants for their child, really." "Thanks, Dad," Jake said, his voice tight with emotion. "That means a lot. I'm sorry we weren't more supportive when you first told us. We were scared for you, worried about the challenges you'd face. But looking at you two together, seeing the life you're building, I'm not worried anymore. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a gift from the universe. Jake stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the main house, struggling with his tie, his hands shaking with nerves and excitement. "Let me," Cole said from the doorway, and Jake looked up to see his soon-to-be husband looking devastating in a well-tailored suit. Cole crossed the room and gently batted Jake's hands away, fixing the tie with practiced ease. "I can't believe this is really happening," Jake said softly. "Believe it." Cole's hands lingered on Jake's chest once the tie was perfect. "In a few hours, you're going to be my husband, legally, officially, permanently mine." "I was always yours," Jake said. "From that first day I walked onto this ranch, I just didn't know it yet." They kissed, careful not to disturb their carefully styled hair, both of them grinning like fools. The ceremony was perfect. They'd written their own vows, and when it was Jake's turn to speak, he looked at Cole and said, "I came to Montana looking for a summer job and found my entire future. You taught me that being brave enough to be yourself is the greatest gift you can give someone else. You taught me that love isn't about fitting into boxes or meeting expectations. It's about finding someone who sees all of you and chooses you anyway. I choose you, Cole Brennan. Today, tomorrow, forever." Cole's vows were simpler but no less powerful. "Jake Morrison, you walked onto my property and into my heart, and nothing has been the same since. You made me believe I could have this: love, partnership, happiness. You made me brave enough to reach for what I wanted instead of settling for what was safe. I promise to spend every day of the rest of our lives choosing you, protecting you, loving you with everything I am." There wasn't a dry eye in the meadow when they kissed as husbands, and the cheer that went up could probably be heard in town. The reception was exactly what they'd wanted, relaxed, joyful, full of love and laughter. Mrs. Henderson's cake was a masterpiece. The local band they'd hired played a mix of country and classic rock. They danced their first dance to an old Johnny Cash song, and Jake rested his head on Cole's shoulder and thought, "This is happiness. This moment, this man, this life." Later, when the party was winding down and the stars were coming out, Cole pulled Jake away from the crowd for a moment alone. They stood at the edge of the meadow, looking at the ranch house lit up with string lights and full of the people they loved. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked. "I'm thinking that a year ago I was alone and lonely and convinced I'd always be that way. And now look at this. Look at what we built." Jake wrapped his arms around Cole's waist from behind, resting his chin on Cole's shoulder. "We built something pretty incredible, didn't we?" "Yeah, we did." Cole turned in Jake's arms, and in the starlight his dark eyes were full of love and wonder. "And this is just the beginning, Jake. We have so much ahead of us. So many more moments, so many more memories to make." "I can't wait," Jake said, and kissed his husband under the Montana stars, both of them knowing with absolute certainty that they'd found their forever. Epilogue 1 year later. The horse rescue was Jake's favorite place on the entire ranch. They'd converted the old south barn, adding new stalls and a rehabilitation paddock. They currently had 6 horses, all rescues, all with stories of neglect or abuse that made Jake's heart ache. But here, with patience and love, they were healing. Jake was in the paddock with Moonlight, a gray mare who'd been rescued from a hoarding situation, when he heard Cole's truck pull up. He smiled, watching his husband cross the yard with that purposeful stride Jake loved. "How's she doing?" Cole asked, leaning on the fence. "Better every day. She let me halter her without any fuss this morning." Jake gave the mare one final pat and climbed over the fence to kiss Cole hello. It still gave him a little thrill, this casual intimacy, the fact that he could kiss his husband in broad daylight without fear or shame. "Good," Mrs. Henderson called. "She's found another one that needs us. A gelding owner passed away and family was going to send him to slaughter." "Can we take him?" Cole smiled. "I already said yes. I know you, Jake. You'd never forgive me if I said no." They walked back to the house hand in hand, talking about logistics, about fundraising for the rescue, about the article Jake was writing about their first year running it. Inside, the house smelled like the beef stew Jake had put in the slow cooker that morning, and it felt like home in every sense of the word. "I talked to my editor today," Jake said as they washed up for dinner. "She wants me to write a book about sustainable ranching, about our journey, about building queer community in rural spaces." Cole's head whipped around. "Jake, that's amazing. Are you going to do it?" "I don't know. It's intimidating. And it would mean being even more public about our relationship, our lives." Cole dried his hands and pulled Jake close. "Then we'll be public. We're not hiding anymore, remember. And Jake, you have an important story to tell. You could help other people, other couples trying to figure out how to make it work in places like this. You'd be okay with it, having our life on display like that. I'm married to you, wearing a ring, living openly as a gay man in small-town Montana. I'm already on display." Cole kissed his forehead. "Write the book, Jake. Tell our story, make a difference." That night after dinner, they sat on the porch like they did most evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. The ranch was thriving. The new grazing patterns had improved the land dramatically. Their cattle were healthy. The rescue was gaining recognition and support. They'd found their rhythm, their place, their people. "Happy?" Cole asked, pulling Jake against his side. Jake thought about everything that had led him here. The confusion and fear, the brave confession in the barn, the challenges they'd faced, the love they'd built. He thought about the book he might write, the horses they'd save, the life they'd continue building together. Deliriously, he said, "You." Cole's arm tightened around him. more than I ever thought possible. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue, stars beginning to emerge like promises. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate together. But tonight they had this, each other, their home, their hard-won happiness. And that was more than enough. It was everything. The end. Red, did this story touch your heart? If Cole and Jake's journey moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more emotional, heartfelt LGBTQ plus romantic stories.